On May 19th, 2023, at about 9:45 a.m., 34-year-old Jeremy Bailey called police to report that he had harmed his wife, her parents-in-law, and 3 of the family's dogs. When officers arrived, 2 dogs lay at the foot of the stairs to the upper floor, and 3 people were found upstairs, 1 in each bedroom. Paramedics determined that the 3 upstairs occupants were no longer alive, and a 3rd dog was located in the basement. Investigators found spent shell casings near each person and the dog, along with a black firearm whose slide was locked to the rear and magazines removed, plus an open magazine with the magazines missing. A receipt for ammunition was found, and point-of-purchase surveillance showed the suspect in the store about 45 minutes before Bailey called dispatch. Police detained him after he stated he would surrender. He complied with the warrant and was taken into custody without incident. Bailey was transported to the Layton Police Department for questioning, where recordings were made. He told investigators that he was responsible for fatalities among his wife, her parents, and 3 of the family dogs. According to initial charging documents, one of the victims texted a therapist that morning about serious problems requiring intervention and noted they could not discuss further because Bailey was inside the residence. A short time after the incident, Bailey posted on his wife's social media page that he had just caused fatalities among everyone and shared his address. He described the events as a mass attack. Bailey admitted entering the bedroom and firing at Anastasia twice. The rest of his wife's family were in nearby rooms and were struck soon after his wife. In Davis County, Jeremy Bailey became the central figure in a case involving the loss of his wife, her father, her stepmother, and 3 family dogs. During questioning, he asked that his surviving dog not be moved to a canine facility and requested an attorney before speaking, while also inquiring about the availability of capital punishment, saying he would prefer such an outcome to life behind bars. He was booked into the Davis County Jail and pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated taking of lives and 3 counts of discharging a firearm, with 3 additional counts of aggravated cruelty to animals. In October, Bailey accepted a plea deal during a virtual court appearance from the same jail. Bailey's confession described a methodical plan he had formed over days, and when asked about the gravity of his acts, he replied that he could not believe what he had done. Investigators described his statement as cold and matter-of-fact, with no obvious remorse for the losses suffered by his family and pets. His defense argued for a reduced sentence based on his mental condition, but prosecutors pressed for the ultimate punishment in light of the plea, and the remaining charges were dismissed as part of the agreement. The charges were amended to first-degree aggravated taking of lives. The court scheduled a sentencing for December to determine the terms given the circumstances and his mental state. At sentencing, he received 3 consecutive life terms without parole for the acts against his wife, her father, her stepmother, and the 3 family dogs, with the plea averting any further state-imposed penalties. The case stands as a stark reminder of how domestic violence can escalate into deliberate violence and of the lasting pain borne by those left behind. The narrative underscores the importance of addressing underlying issues and protecting families from such tragedy. The events culminated in a sentence that reflects the gravity of the acts and the impact on relatives and pets alike. Thomas and Janice Belt, longtime members of the Clearfield Citizens Patrol, were described by family and friends as loyal, selfless people who quietly gave of themselves and helped others. On November 23, 2022, their 26-year-old grandson, Jeremy Belt, argued with his mother and claimed he believed his grandparents meant to harm him. During the dispute, he spoke of feeling an electric current in the room and asked if she could sense it as well. As anger rose, he struck his mother in the face and she left the house. Later, he confronted his grandparents in the garage, where they were gathering their belongings to leave, and followed them there with the intent to stay or depart with them. Using a small sledgehammer, he began to damage their car and severed the motor cord to the garage door so they could not escape. He kicked them in the chest and continued hammering, leaving them unable to rise. He then went to the bedroom, retrieved a Dvatsa DVA caliber rifle, loaded it, and returned to the garage to discharge the firearm at Janice. Realizing more rounds were needed, he went for additional ammunition and returned to discharge at Thomas, who did not survive his injuries. Afterward, he returned the rifle to the room, closed and locked the armory, and went to his basement bedroom. Around 3:10 p.m., Janice and Thomas's daughter, Belt's mother, arrived home to find her parents in the garage and immediately called the police, fearing Belt might still be inside. Clearfield police surrounded the residence, and after exchange with Belt's mother and law enforcement, Belt surrendered and was taken into custody. Initially, he denied involvement, insisting that his grandparents had tried to harm him and that he had returned home around 3 o'clock. That day, investigators found Belt's grandparents in the garage, but surveillance footage contradicted his initial claim that he had discovered them there. Facing the evidence, Belt revised his account and admitted he had harmed them, detailing the sequence of actions he took. He recalled kicking them, striking with a hammer, and finally using a .22 caliber rifle to end their lives. The scene yielded the firearm and several household items, corroborating his confession. He disclosed prior use of methamphetamine the night before, and on the day of the incident, marijuana and a benzodiazepine. After admitting the act, Belt was arrested without resistance and held in the Davis County Jail without bail. Officials charged him with 2 counts of aggravated homicide, along with illegal firearm possession and additional related offenses. As part of a plea, the agreement converted 2 counts of aggravated homicide to 2 counts of first-degree homicide. The agreement also dismissed other charges as part of the arrangement. 2 months later, in September 2024, the trial began, with prosecutors contending that the killing was premeditated, noting acts such as damaging the garage door motor to trap them, followed by the use of a sledgehammer and the rifle. They also referenced a 2019 incident in which he harmed his ex-girlfriend in the same garage, slamming her head against a car and rendering her unconscious. Prosecutors stressed the brutality of the acts, while the defense argued mental instability linked to substance use and psychological issues, calling for mitigation. A plea deal aimed to temper the sentence and avoid capital punishment, arguing that Belt's guilty plea and cooperation showed remorse. Stimulants such as methamphetamine and Xanax were cited as factors in Belt's impaired self-control at the time of the offense. The defense argued the act was not wholly premeditated, suggesting Belt became angry and lost control during a tense family moment. Yet the weight of the evidence and the seriousness of the crime led to Jeremy Dwayne Belt, age 28, receiving 2 consecutive terms of 15 years each. The total term may span from 30 years to life, depending on future parole eligibility. The court found the act premeditated, noting that Belt damaged the garage door to trap his grandparents and used an instrument to carry out the assault. A separate case of severe harm toward a child has provoked public outrage. The case of Shanda Vander Ark illustrates cruelty. It began with the discovery of 15-year-old Timothy Ferguson in July 2022 in a state of severe neglect. The emaciated youth weighed just 69 pounds with signs of hypothermia. The investigation uncovered a sequence of shocking events behind closed doors. Norton Shores, Michigan authorities launched a criminal inquiry, and Vander Ark, Timothy's mother, became the primary suspect. Evidence from the home showed severe neglect and injuries consistent with prolonged mistreatment. Vander Ark was arrested, and her surviving children were placed in protective custody. Investigators interviewed family members, neighbors, and school officials, leading to charges. Prosecutors filed first-degree felony charges, alleging she caused the demise of her son and inflicted substantial harm to a child. The case drew attention due to the extent of neglect and the harm endured by Timothy. In a week-long trial, witnesses testified that Timothy slept in a small basement closet without furniture or blankets. A detective presented photographs of the closet, where the only items found were a blue tarp and an Amazon box. In a home where the air carried the strong scent of urine and feces, authorities found surveillance cameras throughout and locks on the refrigerator and pantry to stop Timothy from sneaking food while he was severely malnourished. Timothy was placed under the care of his brother, Byron Ferguson, 20, who faced complicity charges in his death. Ferguson frequently voiced frustration, and a text suggested he was prepared to harm Timothy. Accounts from Vander Ark and Ferguson described plans to make Timothy uncomfortable, such as forcing him to stand for hours facing a wall or to sprint up and down stairs while being chased. Ferguson admitted to punishing his brother with extreme measures, including spicy sauce applied to bread or poured into his mouth. Timothy was often subjected to an ice bath for long stretches, and restraints like handcuffs and zip ties were used to limit his movement. The day before Timothy's life ended, he did not respond in the morning, and Ark proposed using a painful method to wake him. A heated snack was used to provoke a response, and Ferguson carried out the action as directed. His mother requested further humiliating punishments, which Ferguson said were meant to be performed to satisfy her. Ferguson said he tried to resuscitate Timothy for about 18 minutes before emergency services were called, later confessing the full sequence of events. He claimed that all of it occurred at Ark's urging, intended to please their mother. During testimony, Ark caused the court to pause when confronted with images related to the case. She said she did not remember many details about the days, weeks, and months leading up to the end of Timothy's life. Her attorney sought to portray her as a hard-working, educated parent, while the lead prosecutor pressed on how she treated Timothy relative to her other children. Ferguson pleaded guilty to first-degree child abuse and received a sentence of 30 to 100 years in prison. He asked for mercy a few weeks later. A subsequent appeal was filed by Vander Ark in an effort to overturn the decision terminating her parental rights regarding her 8-year-old son, who was living with Ark and Ferguson during the abuse. Vander Ark's parental rights were terminated in a civil case after she was convicted of a crime in early 2023, though the Court of Appeals has not yet ruled on the appeals in either matter. The sentencing hearing, attended by Millie and Nolan, her 2 remaining children, marked another milestone in the case. Ren Millie spoke with deep remorse for not shielding her brother and for the moments that slipped away when she hadn't spoken love as often as she should have. In his statement, Nolan urged that Ark should not be freed. The siblings both believed Ark deserved the harshest possible punishment for her actions. Judge Matthew K. reacted with outrage, describing Ark's conduct as intentional cruelty. Ark, facing charges, refused to speak and showed no remorse. The judge sentenced Shanda Vander Ark to life without the possibility of parole, plus an additional term of 50 to 100 years for harm to a child. Paul Ferguson pleaded guilty to a first-degree offense involving harm to a child for the severe mistreatment Timothy endured. Before sentencing, Ferguson asked for mercy so he could learn and change, accepting the price of his choices while acknowledging that nothing could restore what was lost. After deliberations, Muskegon County Judge Matthew Sell handed Ferguson a sentence of 30 to 100 years, with credit for 592 days already served. The Timothy case stands as a stark reminder that neglect and aggression can take root within families, often hidden behind closed doors, and it highlights concerns such as domestic violence, mental health, and safeguarding vulnerable youth. Natalia Martinez's story follows. Born in the late 80s in Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay, she was the youngest child in her family. Not much is documented about her temperament, but she enjoyed close ties with relatives, especially her sister Claudia. Her father worked as a senior salesman for a large international appliance company, which allowed the family to live comfortably. Natalia was cheerful and sociable, forming a tight circle of friends who supported one another. After finishing high school, she spent more time with friends, enjoying parties and trips to Uruguay's beaches. To celebrate her 19th birthday on the 1st of January in 2007, Natalia and her friends planned a 2-week trip to La Paloma, a small resort town. On the 16th of January, they traveled to a nearby resort in RS, where Natalia was pleased to reunite with her parents and sister, who were there for a 4-day vacation. The family enjoyed the beach and were well known in the town, often returning to familiar spots as if it were a second home. On the 18th of January, Natalia and Claudia drove to a nearby tourist town less than an hour from RS, intending to stop at a popular spa about halfway in the San Antonio area. After the spa visit, the girls planned to attend a disco with 3 of Natalia's friends. Claudia felt tired and chose to go home to their parents. Still, the 19-year-old Natalia Martinez remained determined to keep to her plans and joined her friends at a popular nightclub, staying there until around 5 a.m. As morning approached, the girls decided to leave the party and head home. Natalia, however, was absorbed in a conversation with Leonardo Rakovan, an old acquaintance who owned a bookstore. They paused near the exit to continue talking, while Natalia's friends stepped outside and climbed into the car they had arrived in, planning to go home together. They grew tired and settled in when one of them offered to check on Natalia. Returning to the nightclub, they found Natalia and Leonardo had vanished. They realized Natalia could not have left without saying something, since they hadn't seen her depart, and worry set in. They headed to the second floor and spotted Leonardo's BMW in the parking lot. The driver was inside. The tinted windows made it hard to tell if anyone sat in the passenger seat, though there was movement inside. They called out to Leonardo, asking about Natalia. He said he was in the car with a friend and that he had spoken briefly to Natalia before parting ways, but he claimed he had no idea what happened afterward or why she hadn't returned. The girls assumed Natalia had gone home, so they drove to Claudia's relatives, who were at the police station a short distance from the club. Rosalia and Silva halted near the house to attract Claudia's attention without waking the family, but no one answered. They returned to the club where they had last seen Natalia and searched for about 2 hours, but found nothing and had no clue about her whereabouts. Around 8 in the morning, Silva came home, exhausted and deeply worried. She told her parents everything, fearing something terrible might have occurred. They tried to reassure her, saying she should rest and that Natalia was probably already at home. She slept, but when she woke at 11 in the morning, her anxiety intensified. Natalia's family joined the search, and her friends went back to the club to look again, but the club was closed and no useful information emerged. They scoured the surrounding area, yet nothing was found by 5 in the afternoon. Natalia's family and friends arrived at the Maldonado police station as investigators reviewed several photos, including one showing the group of girls relaxing at a club that evening. The image helped them determine Natalia's outfit and sharpen the search description. The police took the statement seriously and opened a formal inquiry. The family said Natalia had attended a party where she might have had too much to drink and left with someone, but Rosalia and Sila claimed Natalia had not consumed any alcohol that night. They also dismissed the officers' suspicions about illegal substances. The search began at the last known location, the club. It was open, yet there were no surveillance cameras at the time. Officers spoke with club staff and learned a group of 3 young men had been trying to approach the women throughout the evening. Natalia's friends confirmed the men had been bothering them, but the investigation centered on the person with whom Natalia had been talking before she disappeared. Leonardo soon emerged as the prime suspect, since he was the last to see Natalia, yet his acquaintances described him as kind and calm, with no signs of cruelty, and he was a young businessman. His girlfriend waited in a car while he spoke with Natalia. After saying goodbye, he returned to the car. From the vehicle, he saw Natalia go down the stairs and onto the porch. He said that after that moment, he became distracted by the conversation with his girlfriend and did not see her again. He insisted he was not involved, but the police remained cautious and insisted on a thorough check of the BMW he drove away in after the party. Several witnesses reported a similar car in various locations around the city, including near a forest on the outskirts. One man claimed to have seen a couple in a car near a lakeside area in the woods on the night Natalia went missing. A search warrant was obtained for Leonardo's car. In the initial inspection, a long, dark strand of hair was found on the car floor and sent for analysis. It did not match Natalia, belonging to someone else. The car's interior showed no signs of a struggle or other suspicious activity, suggesting the car had been cleaned after Natalia disappeared. Police used this detail as part of the ongoing inquiry. On January 22nd, a passerby on the outskirts of Parole found items along the roadside, including a woman's handbag with a wallet and a pair of ladies' shoes. The most crucial clue linked to Natalia Martinez, a case drawing intense media attention. Aware of the situation, the witness promptly alerted the police, but the coverage spread rumors that Natalia's family had to publicly deny. One rumor claimed she was involved with drug dealers, which her father refuted in an official television statement. Yet rumors persisted, with some alleging an attack or that she had perished. Police were overwhelmed by false testimonies that required verification, hindering the investigation. Meanwhile, the media aired even far-fetched theories, turning the case into a compelling story that boosted readership. The disappearance triggered a massive search with police, friends, family, and hundreds of volunteers. It quickly became clear there was no evidence she was near the club, so the search widened across Uruguay, including the coast. Most operations were on land with service dogs, later aided by military and civilian aircraft. The city fire brigade participated and asked for sewer checks, yet no remains were found. By that point, authorities had largely concluded she was no longer alive. The critical window for locating a person missing is typically 48 hours. A notable development occurred when a bone was found on the Grand Plateau, but tests showed it was not human. The search paused with no new leads, while Natalia's relatives continued hoping she was alive and held somewhere. In 2000, a woman's remains were found in a forest near Lake Yolo. The remains were in poor condition and were sent for examination to determine identity. This location lay several kilometers from the club where Natalia Martinez was last seen, and the clothing found with the remains suggested a possible match. Following the discovery, police recalled a couple who had been seen in a car near the club. In a forested area, the remains lay in an advanced state of decay, challenging the forensic team to extract key details. To carry out a thorough assessment, 5 forensic specialists were summoned. They identified the remains as Natalia Martinez. Their findings suggested she did not meet with a natural end, as faint marks around the neck hinted at constriction, though poisoning was ruled out. Because of the condition, no signs of violence could be confirmed. The remains were found bound with nylon, but it remained unclear whether the binding occurred before or after her passing. Months passed, and as the inquiry continued, an unforeseen development emerged. The man who had found her belongings along the roadside was located at the base of a cliff near his home. His name was initially kept confidential. A post-mortem showed blunt force trauma to the head, occurring well before the fall from the cliff, suggesting he had been cast from the edge. This led investigators to treat the two matters as connected, though more evidence was required. Natalia's father, Ever Martinez, had fallen into deep despair after his daughter's passing and the rumors surrounding the family. He ended his life at home. He was found by his daughter Claudia and his wife. Authorities closed that case after confirming he acted alone. For a long time, progress remained slow in the Natalia inquiry. Then fresh information appeared from text messages with a friend just days before Natalia's passing. In those messages, Natalia spoke of a man she had recently met online. It later emerged that he was among the men seen at the nightclub on the night she vanished. Witnesses had identified 3 young men sitting nearby from early in the probe, but this lead had been overlooked. After questioning them, investigators grew wary of their involvement as they provided inconsistent accounts of where they were and what they did during that night and the following morning. A witness kept safe for her protection was the partner of one arrestee. Her testimony pointed to Rodrigo Verges as connected to the case at that moment. He was 25 when investigators later disclosed that he had previously given false statements during questioning. Authorities recorded telephone exchanges that linked Rodrigo to the case as the principal suspect. DNA samples were taken, but they offered little help because the remains were heavily decomposed. Investigators then reached out to Rodrigo's friends and kin. On June 8, 2010, a young man testified with companions who had been at a nightclub the night Natalia was last seen. They claimed no involvement and said they hired a paid companion afterward to join their revelry, but denied any link to Natalia. Rodrigo, the main suspect, denied knowing Natalia and said he hadn't spent time with her, yet messages showed they had talked online and planned to meet at a party, suggesting his initial account was incomplete. A day later, police spoke again, and Rodrigo admitted meeting Natalia online and planning to meet at a club. He said the exchange went poorly, and at dawn he suggested moving to another nearby club, misled her, wanted to be alone with her, and began to harass her. When she rejected him, he panicked. Natalia then suffered an asthma attack. Without her inhaler, she tensed and convulsed, and in his car she ceased responding, and he did not know how to help. After the party, he planned to return to his family's farm, but after her demise, he moved to conceal the body in the woods, binding her and dragging her deeper before covering her with branches. A beach witness said a couple was seen and Natalia's body bore signs of neck injuries. Police later confirmed that Rodrigo's other friends were not involved, and they were released after his confession. Rodrigo was formally charged and taken into custody. During preliminary hearings in the middle of 2010, he recanted, claiming the confession came under pressure and that he did not commit the act. The claim against him seemed unlikely at first, because his confession included numerous details that only the perpetrator would know, including the precise location where the girl's remains were found. Yet Rodrigo insisted on his innocence despite the mounting evidence. His defense team backed his assertion and argued that he was not at the club that night. They introduced mobile phone records and a statement from his employer confirming he had worked his usual evening shift. The next day, he attended a friend's wedding, and no one noticed anything unusual about his behavior on September 2nd, 2010. Leonardo Roccavan, the bookstore owner who had been the initial main suspect, testified for the prosecution. He said that during a conversation, he argued with a young man he identified as Rodrigo, implying Rodrigo had been at the nightclub rather than at work. Natalia's friends corroborated that he was at the nightclub that night. Forensic experts reviewing the autopsy noted that although the girl had asthma symptoms, the condition could not have caused her passing so quickly, and the episode likely lasted several hours. There were signs of strangulation on her neck, which was likely the cause of the end of her life. From late August to mid-September 2010, the prosecution assembled a narrative that led to Rodrigo Verges's conviction for Natalia Martinez's demise, and he received a 9-year sentence. In February 2011, his lawyer filed an appeal, arguing the ruling was flawed and that the prosecution was biased, noting that no witness to the kidnapping or to the act was presented, nor any compelling direct evidence. Natalia's family expressed disappointment, saying the sentence was lighter than they had expected. They later filed a civil lawsuit against Rodrigo Verges, seeking damages for the harm to Natalia's family and for her father's passing. Initially, they requested $15, but after discussion, the amount rose to $7,000. The court rejected the request for a longer sentence. On October 27, 2014, the defendant, age 29, was pardoned after serving 4 years and 2 months, largely due to good conduct in custody. 2 sisters grew up attending the same school, often walked together, and spent time with their families after finishing high school. Sandra focused on building a family, entering a serious relationship that led to marriage and the birth of their son, Chad. That marriage didn't last, as Sandra soon realized her husband wasn't the right partner. After the divorce, another relationship followed but ended in disappointment, and she eventually broke things off. In 1976, as a single mother, Sandra found work at a factory making pumps and pistons for industrial machinery. The job required the family to relocate to the larger city of Hutchinson, where she quickly proved herself, earning the respect of her supervisors through steady dedication. During this period, she met her third husband, Jerry Miles. Their instant attraction grew into a devoted partnership, and they married swiftly. A year later, she was expecting again, and in September, they welcomed a daughter, Tracy, who fulfilled Sandra's long-held dream of a large family. Outwardly, their life looked perfect, with a strong bond and shared priorities, and Jerry enjoyed many moments with Tracy at the nearby lake. Only close friends and family knew of a hidden trouble. After 7 years, Sandra could no longer bear his drinking. She had kept the problem private, but finally decided to end the marriage and raise the children on her own. He appeared kind when sober, yet his drinking altered his behavior, and relapses grew more frequent, placing a heavy burden on Sandra. She kept working at the factory to support the family, growing exhausted but determined not to quit. Jerry offered some help, but after another relapse, she faced the challenges alone, steadfast in her commitment to her children. Sandra Miles had built a bright life for her children, remaining a conscientious mother who spent every spare moment with them, even when hardships pressed in. Her steady dedication drew her closer to her daughter Tracy, while her son Chad had grown up and moved out, leaving Tracy to lean on her mother. By 1997, however, the mother-daughter bond began to fray as Tracy entered a first relationship in the typical rebellious phase of adolescence. Sandra, mindful of her own past failed marriages, tried to steer Tracy without smothering her, hoping the turbulence would pass. Tracy's affection faltered, and a rift widened between them. In a bid to win her daughter's trust, Sandra surprised Tracy with a black moon car, a symbol of independence she had long desired. Tracy cherished it and started arriving at school first to parade it before classmates. Yet the outlook grew unsettled when, in the spring, Sandra's son Chad and his girlfriend Mindy shared the news that Mindy was pregnant, filling the house with the anticipation of a grandchild. Tragically, Sandra would not live to see that moment. A crisis arose when Sandra's sister, Pat Douglas Butler, received an urgent call from Sandra's workplace reporting that she had been absent for 5 days and Pat herself could not reach her. Worried, Pat and her husband went to Sandra's home, only to find the door locked and the house seemingly empty, a startling change for a woman who lived there with Tracy. The pair then checked at the school, but Tracy had also been missing for several days and the family could not be reached. Fearing the worst, Pat contacted the police, who took the report and prepared to investigate. Pat handed over a spare key to the front door, and law enforcement officers entered the house, and the air carried a strong, unmistakable odor of decay as seasoned officers safeguarded the scene to preserve evidence and request reinforcements. When the backup arrived, they found a woman lying on her bed, her body partially covered by a blanket. Beneath it, a power cord from a household appliance was looped around her neck, suggesting asphyxia. The body was in advanced decomposition, obscuring many details, including the scope of injuries on her face. The identity couldn't be established immediately, but dental records later confirmed the person as Sandra Miles. Tracy, Sandra's daughter, was missing from the house, raising fears she had been abducted, and a missing person alert was issued as the search began. Detective Hutchinson examined every possibility, considering neighbors and Sandra's ex-husband as potential sources of motive for harming a 48-year-old mother who had devoted her life to her children. The news shocked the sister, her son, and the ex-husband, who were promptly informed and left reeling. Sandra was described as kind, resilient, and determined to build a future for her family. Forensic experts outlined Sandra's last moments. She had been knocked to the ground by blows to the head with a blunt object, incapacitated, and a cord used to apply pressure around her neck. Large contusions and internal injuries indicated a prolonged, violent confrontation, and investigators believed there were at least 2 attackers. Investigators considered a robbery gone wrong, with intruders attempting to steal from the home and fearing she would report them to authorities, a scenario that ended in homicide. Yet a thorough examination yielded little decisive evidence, leaving the case unresolved and keeping the search for Tracy and the motive moving forward. Scenarios suggested there were no signs of a break-in. The only loss appeared to be Tracy's cherished car, making theft an unlikely sole motive for a life-ending assault. The violence of Sandra's injuries pointed to a calculated strike rather than a panicked reaction. This degree of cruelty hinted at a feud that had simmered for years, though investigators also weighed the possibility of a roaming attacker. The severity of the harm implied multiple participants. With Tracy missing, the search for the perpetrators intensified. Detectives believe Sandra may have unwittingly let her attackers inside, since there were no signs of forced entry. The inquiry widened to Sandra's circle, especially her ex-husband, who might harbor resentment. Sandra's third husband, Jerry, who faced personal difficulties, drew attention as a possible participant in the dispute, but he had an alibi and was ruled out. Interviews with friends, neighbors, and colleagues yielded little progress. Sandra's sister Pat told investigators she last saw Sandra 5 days earlier. On that same day, Tracy had visited the school, marking a pivotal date. Neighbors described the community as peaceful and close-knit. A dawning concern spread as crowds gathered and authorities restricted access to the area. A witness across the street recalled seeing Tracy about 5 days earlier on March 25th with two young men who climbed into a car and drove away, after which she vanished. An abducted schoolgirl case led detectives to interview two nearby friends, Mark and Jay, at their homes. Mark sped away when he spotted police in a red car lingering in the distance. The chase suggested something was being concealed, so a detective alerted the nearby patrol to the direction. Mark would not have raced off so quickly if he weren't trying to hide something. The officers soon closed in, stopping him a few kilometers from his house. He was driving with a friend unsettled by the recent tragedy at Sandra's residence. The two youths tried to convince the police that fear alone explained their odd conduct, but seasoned detectives suspected more and took them to the station for questioning. In interrogation, they claimed they were frightened by the news from the Miles residence. Their stories largely matched, yet no solid evidence emerged, so they were released. Nevertheless, they became important witnesses because detectives learned that Tracy had recently dated a young man named Jeremy Bell, and Sandra disapproved, fearing his influence on her daughter. Tracy eventually broke with Jeremy and began seeing Paul Nelson. Several witnesses noted a heated argument with her mother over Jeremy and Paul, both of whom Sandra disapproved. Detectives questioned many teens connected to this circle. They found that Jeremy had a volatile temper and had sometimes shown hostility toward Paul. Yet Paul was not the main cause of the split. Sandra's disapproval played the decisive role, and the relationship between Sandra and Jeremy was highly strained. Sandra even sought a restraining order against him, as he accused her of ruining his bond with Tracy and voiced threats, though he did not act on them. At drunken gatherings, he often vented how much Sandra bothered him to his friends, and Sandra's effort to shield her daughter only deepened the clashes. Jeremy was already on the police radar for multiple violations, and the restraining order intensified the situation, raising concerns that he could abduct Tracy. The detectives believed that Jeremy might have harmed Sandra and was holding Tracy, so they prepared to question him, along with his friend William Lennon, who had been arrested for burglary a few days earlier that month. Since Jeremy was already in custody for burglary with his friend, investigators pressed to question them. While Jeremy was behind bars for an unrelated matter, investigators could not rule out his involvement in the Sandra Sanders case, and Tracy's fate remained uncertain. With no demands from the kidnapper, police feared she might already be gone, yet she could still be held, making her safety urgent. In prison, he explained that he was not with Tracy at that time because a restraining order barred contact, ending their relationship. Tracy then began dating Paul Nelson, and Jeremy pulled away. Police noted Jeremy's clear dislike for Paul and his fear that Paul might pull Tracy toward trouble, though he said he bore no ill will toward Sandra. Nevertheless, their communication improved after Tracy started dating Paul, and Jeremy supported Sandra during this period. On March 25th, just before the fatal incident affecting Sandra, Jeremy warned Tracy about her new boyfriend, whom he deemed dangerous. By that time, the medical examiner determined that Sandra Sanders had perished on March 26th after 4 injuries and blunt, force trauma to the head, with strangulation used to ensure she was no longer living. Police needed to locate Paul Nelson, the prime suspect, but he was missing since March 26th. Investigators learned Paul had remained in touch with his friend Zwickel, with whom he had lived before going into hiding. Zwickel said Sandra did not approve of the Tracy-Paul relationship, seeing Paul as a bad influence who might push Tracy toward illegal activities. Despite Sandra's objections, Tracy and Paul continued to meet in secret. Weeks later, Sandra learned of this and told Tracy that if she wanted a family, she would need to move in with Paul. This news surprised them since they had nowhere to live. Sandra urged Tracy to consider ending her pregnancy, and Tracy agreed. The abortion intensified the strain, and Sandra even threatened to take away Tracy's car keys. The tension did not drive Tracy to end things with Paul, and may have fed his grudge against Sandra, whom he and Tracy viewed as an obstacle. Zwickel later said that on March 26th, Paul returned home around 10 in the evening. Paul Nelson, an 18-year-old, began packing his things and told Zwickel that he intended to depart town with Tracy. They believed they had $2,000 enough for their escape. Paul confided to Zwickel that he and Tracy planned to flee in her car, and Zwickel assumed the motive was a quarrel between them. He did not mention Sandra's death when Zwickel asked how he'd obtained the money. Paul claimed he had sold Sandra's tape recorder at a pawn shop. Later, it turned out the device had vanished from the house after the assault. In reality, Paul was not truthful. The sale of the recorder netted him less than $50, and it remained unclear how he could have gathered such a large sum. Soon Zwickel observed Paul and Tracy slipping into a car and driving off without signs of distress, as if headed for Mexico. Given the circumstances, Zwickel suspected Paul might be involved in the crime. Consequently, Paul and Tracy were added to a nationwide wanted list. Investigators in Kansas identified 18-year-old Paul Nelson as the prime suspect. They questioned the significance of the $2,000 and whether he had robbed someone or committed another offense. The focus shifted to Sandra's bank accounts. On March 26, Tracy withdrew money from her mother's account, and investigators found that Tracy had accompanied Paul to the bank to cash a check. Tracy claimed her mother had given the funds to buy a new car, but the bank teller noted they were calm and unconcerned. With doubts about Tracy being a hostage growing, investigators revisited the possibility that Paul's friend Zwickel might be telling the truth and that Tracy could be a willing participant rather than a captive. To probe further, they spoke with Tracy's best friend, Candace Keno. Candace revealed that on March 25th, Tracy had told her of a serious clash with her mother, who had taken the car key and threatened to eject Tracy from the house, creating a rift. Candace recalled that after this, Tracy chose to run away with Paul and admitted this during their call. The officer's suspicions were affirmed. No one had ever intended to keep Tracy held. The couple had indeed crossed into Mexico and later became lost. A United States Border Service officer informed investigators that Tracy and Paul had re-entered the United States near El Paso. The motive for their return remained unclear, but their trouble was evident. Efforts to locate them intensified on April 8th when Candace contacted investigators. Investigators learned that Candace had spoken with Tracy by phone, and she provided the police with Tracy's number. Tracy and Paul were found on the outskirts of El Paso and were subsequently taken into custody for questioning. Candace agreed to place another call to help detectives pinpoint the origin of Tracy's call. Arrangements completed, Tracy and Paul were arrested and brought to the station, where Paul spoke in a hushed voice, his gaze kept to the floor. He recounted the events of the evening of the 25th, saying they had mapped an escape and that Tracy had proposed drastic steps to remove her mother from the scene. The following morning, Candace picked up Tracy and they left for school together. Meanwhile, Paul hid in a bedroom with a tree branch he claimed to have found there and intended to use as a weapon to render Sandra unconscious. The police remained skeptical, asking why he would sneak into the house to attack if he did not intend to end her life, given that she could recover and tell authorities. Their investigation made it clear that his aim appeared to be escape rather than capture. Paul then continued his account, claiming Sandra opened the door and began insulting him, and in anger he wrapped a cord around her throat, cutting off her breath before covering her with a blanket and fleeing. Tracy smiled as she testified in the adjoining room, and her story largely matched Paul's, though she asserted she did not act alone and that only he carried out the act. She disclosed that the wooden figurine used in the crime had been hidden in the backyard, and investigators later found it with red-stained marks. The prosecutor announced plans to charge them with first-degree homicide, the maximum penalty being life imprisonment. Paul's defense argued that he acted under Tracy's influence and should be judged for manslaughter, while Tracy's attorney contended that Paul was the instigator and she played a secondary role. The trial began on February 26, 1999, as each side sought to downplay involvement to temper potential sentences. During the proceedings, the youths displayed defiant behavior and laughed provocatively, and Tracy refused to meet with family members who wished to discuss her role in the crime. The proceedings continued as the case moved forward. On April 22, 1999, the court sentenced Tracy Miles and Paul Nelson to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years before parole is possible. Following the ruling, Paul flashed an obscene gesture, and both Tracy and Paul expressed dissatisfaction, showing no signs of remorse. They may seek early release in the future, but Sanders' relatives hope that does not occur. Greg Mulvihill and Diana Lovejoy met online in 2005 and quickly formed a strong bond. They soon moved in together in San Diego, where Diana's passion for athletics grew into competitive triathlon training. The couple enjoyed the outdoors, and San Diego's burgeoning tech scene offered abundant opportunities, with Diana earning a reputation for reliability at work. After 2 years together, they married in 2007, and their honeymoon in Costa Rica included surf school. They settled in Carlsbad, a scenic suburb north of the city, where Diana felt she was living her dream. About 3 years later, Diana began to experience symptoms suggesting fibromyalgia, a chronic condition marked by widespread pain and tenderness. Although the exact cause remains unknown, several factors are thought to contribute to its development. The diagnosis deeply affected their marriage, as the once energetic partner had to adjust to new limits and reduced energy. In 2011, Greg took Diana on a relaxing vacation to Santa Cruz, California, to help her cope with the illness. He recognized the toll on her well-being, including persistent pain, fatigue, and limited energy. The illness required them to adapt, altering the rhythm of their days and shared plans. She stepped away from her career to manage her symptoms and spent more time at home in Carlsbad, her deepest wish being to become a mother who could raise a confident, joyful child. Diana and Greg had been trying for years, but she endured several miscarriages, which took a toll on her physically and emotionally, while she poured her love into their 2 cats, Lanny and Turtle. When Turtle fell ill and passed away, Greg surprised her with a new kitten, Taffy, a thoughtful gesture that brought her unexpected comfort. Months later, after years of disappointment, Diana learned she was pregnant, and Greg, eager to become a father, shared in the joy as the dream she had long held seemed finally within reach. In September 2012, Diana gave birth to a baby boy, and Greg took time off to bond with their newborn, while Diana worried about her son's health and wondered if he might share her condition, even as Greg remained convinced he was healthy. Diana conducted extensive research and found a medicine called Xanax, used for chest infections and sometimes thought to ease fibromyalgia symptoms. She hoped to give her son high doses, but Greg opposed, fearing unnecessary harm. Their disagreement over his care added strain to their marriage, especially after Greg injured his shoulder, left his job, and the family budget shrank, prompting Diana to take a sales job and attempt online cooking videos, with Greg handling the camera and a kitty litter promotion that yielded little. The financial pressures intensified their conflicts, and by July 2014, a police officer questioned Greg about allegations raised by Diana Accord, noting that she had filed multiple police reports. Greg was removed from the family home, while Diana and their son stayed behind, facing the consequences of the allegations. Diana confided to a trusted friend that she had been awakened by improper touching from Greg during sleep after taking medication that left her drowsy. She also claimed harm toward their son. Authorities, including Child Protective Services, became involved after these allegations. Greg denied the charges, claiming Diana brought them up because of a dispute over their son's health. In response, he filed for divorce and sought custody. Investigators found no evidence supporting the accusations. Psychiatric evaluations of Greg and the boy showed no signs of abuse. A judge dismissed the case and granted Greg a 50-50 custody arrangement, to Diana's dismay. Yet Diana remained devoted to motherhood and distanced herself from Greg and the turmoil. As part of the settlement, Diana stayed in the house and compensated Greg for his share of the property. By 2016, the former couple had established a relatively peaceful co-parenting plan with equal access to their son. This fragile equilibrium broke on September 1st, 2016, when the Carlsbad Police Department received a call from Jason Kovac, a friend of Greg. Jason told an officer that Greg had been struck and was in serious condition. A patrol officer drove Greg to the hospital, realizing that waiting for an ambulance would risk his life. The SWAT team arrived and searched the area for an assailant, but none was found. Doctors treated Greg for a bullet wound to the chest. He survived the operation and was placed on life support. While he recovered, detectives spoke with Jason, who explained that a private investigator had contacted Greg with crucial documents related to his custody case with Diana. The unnamed investigator had fixed a meeting time and place, and Greg asked Jason to accompany him for backup. They headed to a remote site under a new moon, armed with only a flashlight and a child's baseball bat, the lone light coming from their torch. Under a narrow moonlit sliver, Jason directed Greg to locate a package affixed to a power pole. Greg moved forward with a flashlight when a sudden firearm discharge shattered the night. Bullets whizzed past as the pair sprinted toward their car, and Jason learned Greg had been struck and dialed emergency services. Jason could not describe the shooter in detail, but he guided detectives to the exact location. Nearby, investigators uncovered a clue, a neatly folded Angry Birds towel seemingly left to mislead Greg. Jason testified that he heard 6 rounds, while investigators found no shell casings or weapon, suggesting the assailant was practiced at erasing traces. A strong odor of feces filled the air, leading to a pile of excrement and a towel that had been used for cleanup. The feces and towel were preserved as potential evidence and carefully packaged for the crime lab, where DNA analysis could take as long as a month. Meanwhile, detectives pursued other leads, focusing on Greg's estranged wife, Diana Lovejoy. Diana denied involvement, offering an alibi that she was at home with their son. Greg woke from life support and began to recover. When able to be questioned, he doubted Diana's capacity for such violence, but recalled their fraught divorce and custody battle. Investigators obtained the phone number used to lure Greg, tracing it to a pay-as-you-go plan and a purchase at Best Buy near Carlsbad. Video footage captured Diana Lovejoy purchasing the phone, and she was arrested during a routine traffic stop. Facing the evidence, she admitted buying the device. She then revealed she had feared Greg had acquired a firearm and had trained at Iron Sights, where she met instructor Weldon McDavid, a former Marine expert. Diana described a romantic tie with Weldon. They had planned only to intimidate Greg to curb his harassment. Weldon allegedly advised buying the phone to lure Greg to a remote site. Diana maintained Weldon's role was limited to intimidation, not to violence. The case illustrates how deception, fear, and calculated intimidation can escalate into danger. Diana Lovejoy drove Weldon McDavid to the site and later collected him when police sirens approached. Weldon said he had to use a firearm against Greg in self-defense because Greg had allegedly threatened him. Diana denied any involvement and said she had never urged Greg to act violently toward her. She faced charges of planning serious harm and of attempting to injure him. Greg survived the injuries and was released from the hospital. News of Diana's involvement horrified onlookers. Weldon was tracked down and brought in for questioning. He claimed to have been at home some 30 minutes away on the night of the incident. When asked for a DNA sample, he grew nervous and suggested he might have stopped to use the bathroom on a dirt road the night before. Investigators obtained a search warrant and found a rifle with a live round and 6 spent shell casings in Weldon's garage. The shell casings matched the witness's account of 6 bullets fired. Weldon was arrested on charges of planning serious harm and of attempting to injure him. During a search of Diana's house, investigators found a suspicious online history showing a search for New Moon, which matched the night of the incident. This mattered because the new moon offered little ambient light, making such an act easier. Investigators concluded Diana possessed premeditated knowledge of the plan and a motive to harm Greg. The divorce settlement was valued at $120,000, and removing him would simplify settling the debt. The trial of Diana Lovejoy and Weldon McDavid began in October 2017. Weldon claimed he had no intent to fire at Greg and that his goal was only to scare him. He said the tension rose when either Greg or Jason shouted that they possessed a firearm. He noted his own marksmanship and argued that if his aim had been lethal, he could have carried it out. The prosecution offered a different view, arguing that Weldon did not act because Greg had shown a flashlight into his eyes, disorienting him after a period of darkness, which prevented a fatal outcome. The jury convicted Diana Lovejoy and Weldon McDavid of planning serious harm and of attempting to injure him. Diana collapsed at the verdict, while observers suspected the collapse might have been feigned. Weldon received a sentence of 50 years to life, and Diana a sentence of 26 years to life. Both maintained their innocence. Bianca Robertson, born on October 17, 1998, grew up to become a remarkable young woman. She excelled at Ruston High School, earning straight A's and graduating with honors. Her strong academic record earned her a 4-year merit scholarship to Jacksonville University in Florida. Bianca planned to major in criminal justice and pursue a dream of becoming an FBI forensic analyst. A multi-talented young woman, she had been a Girl Scout, a cheerleader, and a basketball player, and she studied music, learning the flute, violin, clarinet, and guitar. She lived with her mother and her maternal grandmother, Josephine Perry, and she looked forward to the independence of dorm life in Florida. On June 28, 2017, Bianca, her mother, and her grandmother went shopping at Walmart to prepare for the move. Shortly after leaving the store on a road she knew well, Bianca's car swerved off the pavement and collided with a red pickup that fled the scene. Emergency responders arrived, but she could not be saved, and she passed away at the scene. Initial observations suggested she sustained serious head injuries as her vehicle left the road, and witnesses later reported a red pickup that struck her car and fled. Bianca's grandmother returned home to be met by 2 officers who carried the news. For Bianca's mother, Michelle Robertson, the loss intensified an earlier heartbreak. Her 22-year-old son, James, had passed away in 2013 from a heart condition. A nurse from Delaware County, she had endured a divorce in 2006 and now found herself navigating grief while carrying on for her other child. Rodney recalled Bianca as his favorite, and her steadfast devotion to family inspired them all. As he proudly said, she was one step closer to realizing her dream of becoming an FBI forensic specialist. In the days that followed, the family faced a new reality, yet Bianca's dreams continued to illuminate their path. Bianca focused intently on her future, and her hard work paid off when she earned a 4-year merit scholarship to Jacksonville University. She was one of 3 schools to accept her from 4 applications, and her father noted she had also been accepted by Coastal Carolina and the University of Georgia. Investigators sought CCTV footage to confirm an early theory that Bianca's car swerved and collided with a red pickup, a scenario that would implicate a deliberate act and demand a suspect. Yet the investigation took a striking turn. During the autopsy, forensic experts found a bullet had struck Bianca's head, a finding that changed the course of the inquiry. The evidence prompted detectives to inform the Robertson family that Bianca's passing was not accidental. The revelation sent shockwaves, especially for her mother, Michelle, who could not fathom why someone would harm her daughter. Desperate for clarity, the family trusted investigators to identify the person responsible. Reviewing Walmart security footage from the day of the incident, detectives found no signs of trouble. The family had shopped, loaded their purchases into Bianca's car, and left. The probe suggested the motive might lie in an incident on the highway as she headed home. Bianca's mother recalled packing all the bags into Bianca's car, a 2009 Chevy Malibu they had bought for her 16th birthday. Michelle said Bianca had received everything she wanted, yet she did not see her as spoiled. She believed Bianca was simply loved and ready to work for what she desired. Bianca began her first job at McDonald's at 15 and soon moved to a dietary aid position at Whitehorse Village Retirement Community. In Delaware County, Bianca Robertson's life was suddenly cut short, and a quiet outpouring of support followed. Police retrieved traffic surveillance footage, which helped place the moment when Bianca's car left the roadway. There was no camera at the exact spot, but a camera about 1 mile away provided a reference as maps were reviewed. Review of the footage showed 2 vehicles traveling side by side toward a point where 2 lanes merged into one, and investigators concluded a conflict likely began when one driver failed to yield. From that point on, the driver of the red pickup truck became the primary suspect, though the recording was too grainy to read license plates or identify a face. Detectives pursued that lead, but the evidence available remained limited. Bianca's family said none of them knew anyone with a red pickup, which narrowed the pool of potential witnesses. Re-interviews with witnesses at the scene and with deviatzod and not sat callers failed to yield plate information. Bianca's family has received an outpouring of support from friends, strangers, and people of all ages since her passing. A vigil was held 2 days after the incident, and many shared memories, stories, and condolences. Her mother, Michelle, described Bianca as selfless and compassionate, always putting others' needs first. Bianca would often welcome children in need into her home, even without formal approval. When asked about her actions, she would say that she wanted to help others as she would want someone to help her in a similar situation. That spirit of empathy appeared in many aspects of her life, including an instance when she witnessed a car accident and immediately asked her mother if they could stop to help a kind-hearted woman. In the days that followed, investigators reviewed footage from distant cameras to determine the red pickup's direction and to collect details about its make, model, and license plate. Higher quality footage was sought to advance that effort. Authorities also appealed to the public for information, hoping to shed light on what happened. In the wake of the accident, the pickup truck turned toward P.O. Pike as detectives began canvassing nearby homes and shops for cameras that might have captured it. After an extensive search, they recovered a high-quality recording taken roughly 5 minutes after the incident, showing the red pickup driving by. Witnesses had already called the emergency line to report Bianca Robertson's collision. Though the footage helped, the license plate remained unknown, and it was unclear whether the vehicle in view was the suspect's or a look-alike. 2 days later, a woman came forward, stating she had seen the car and even the driver's face. She described the vehicle as a red pickup that overtook her, stopped at the P.O. Pike intersection, and then turned left. Her account narrowed the search area and showed that the truck in the footage was not the actual suspect's vehicle, but a similar one. A forensic artist drafted a sketch of the caller's described suspect, a white male between 25 and 35 with brown hair and stubble. The police released the sketch in hopes that someone would recognize the man, and Bianca's family was shown the image, but no one identified him. Investigators then considered whether Bianca's passing could be linked to a bias-motivated act. To gather more evidence, they canvassed the area around the last sighting, near the intersection where the truck turned left, seeking a clear surveillance clip. A homeowner within half a mile supplied driveway footage, enabling detectives to pinpoint the relevant video by estimating travel time from the scene to the residence. While the newer footage offered clearer detail, its angle prevented identification of the vehicle or its driver. Efforts continued to obtain another closer recording. Although the license plate remained unreadable, investigators captured distinctive features: a sticker on the right-hand window, a vertical dent on the passenger door, and hood damage, all boosting the odds of locating the truck. A public appeal offered a $5,000 reward for information that might advance the inquiry, with confidence that someone would recognize the distinctive vehicle. 3 days after Bianca Robertson's passing, a lawyer contacted the police on behalf of a client who wished to surrender, claiming his client's involvement in the incident that led to her passing. The incident occurred on a recent Wednesday at approximately 5:30 in the evening. Bianca Robertson, an 18-year-old graduate of Westchester Ruston High School, was driving along Route 100, a 2-lane highway toward Jacksonville University. Her life brimmed with promise, supported by a loving family and a bright future. As she approached the merge with Route 202, the road narrowed from 2 lanes to 1. A dispute over positioning escalated into violence when a man in a red pickup truck, also merging, grew agitated and fired at her, striking her. The suspect, 28-year-old David Desper of Pennsylvania, surrendered to police with his lawyer, refused to testify, and consented to a search of his home, revealing the location of his pickup. Police traced the vehicle to a site previously mentioned by Desper. Distinctive stickers on the windows and damage to the body confirmed it as the same truck. Investigators searched Desper's residence and recovered the firearm used in the attack. Despite this major lead, authorities remained puzzled by the motive. More than 800 loved ones and community members attended a heart-wrenching farewell at St. Paul's Baptist Church in the suburban Westchester borough, about 25 miles away. During the service, many paid tribute to Bianca, including her brothers, officials from her high school, the chief admissions officer from the university she was to attend, and friends. Pastor Wayne Croft Sr. drew a comparison between the shooter and two infamous Florida cases, Zimmerman in the Trayvon Martin matter and Dunn in the Jordan Davis case. Zimmerman was acquitted in 2013. Dunn was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, plus 90 years. The pastor stated that whether Bianca's death arose from road rage or racism, the loss of a brilliant young black woman remains a stark reminder. In the September 2018 trial, Desper was asked to explain his motive. Instead, he requested forgiveness from Bianca's family. For Bianca's parents, facing the man accused was daunting. To show unity, relatives wore T-shirts bearing Bianca's face, and the family wore bracelets bearing the message Bianca Robertson, a rose in God's garden. They gathered at the Chester County Government Services Center to stand together in her memory. Bianca Robertson's memory stands as a stark reminder of the day her life ended on June 28, 2017. Her father, Rodney Robertson, confessed that he didn't know how he would respond when confronted with the person behind the tragedy. He described the shooter as the one who held the firearm that ended his daughter's life. He had no right to do that. Bianca's mother, Michelle Robertson, struggled to accept the loss, desiring to hold her child once more. The prosecutor argued the traffic confrontation arose because Bianca failed to yield as the lanes merged into one. In response, David Desper rolled down the passenger window and discharged a firearm toward Bianca's car. Realizing the gravity of his actions, Desper fled, leaving his pickup with a friend in Pennsylvania and attempting to escape to Delaware. After public attention to the vehicle's distinctive features, Desper hired a lawyer and surrendered. Investigators reviewed his online activity and spoke with acquaintances, but found no signs of a bias motive. As a result, Desper was not charged with a bias-motivated offense. The district attorney noted there were no indications of a racial motive, though many disagreed. Before sentencing, the defense described Desper as harmless and immature for his age, a big kid who liked cars. They argued that he had effectively handed the case to the government by turning himself in. The prosecutor contended that a man in his 28th year with a loaded firearm is not a boy, and that his actions showed adult responsibility. Ironically, Desper's mother had posted online about the search for Bianca's killer, unaware her son was the suspect. Wendy Desper expressed sorrow for her son's actions. Rodney Robertson spoke through tears, asking the defendant why he acted toward his daughter and whether it was about her identity, or merely to get ahead on the road, or simply because he was having a bad day. He added that every dream he had for Bianca ended that day, and all he has left are memories. Desper pleaded guilty to third-degree homicide, and the court sentenced him to 40 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. The courtroom grew tense as the judge announced the verdict. County Judge Amory Wheatcraft imposed the maximum penalty of 20 to 40 years for that grade of homicide. David Desper attempted to appeal, but the court denied his request. Detectives returned to the case file to examine another troubling tale, the story of Michelle Young. Jason Young was born in 1974 in Broward, North Carolina, and grew up in a conventional family. After high school, he attended the prestigious State University in Raleigh, and after graduation, he began work as a salesman for a large retail chain. He proved reliable at work, yet friends described him as inconsistent and unpredictable in his relationships with women, often changing partners. Michelle Young was born in February 1976 in New York and was raised in a close-knit home with her younger sister Meredith and their devoted mother Linda. Linda supported Michelle's early interests in law and economics, and Michelle dreamed of pursuing a career in those fields. Her academic journey led to several universities, and she eventually gained admission to a top university in North Carolina, where she pursued a master's degree and later secured a prestigious job at a leading accounting firm in the state. She quickly established herself as a skilled professional and achieved financial independence. The encounter at a bar on Michelle's birthday, Jason spilled a cocktail on her, he apologized and offered to buy her another, sparked their conversation. As they talked, they discovered many commonalities. They had attended the same college, though Jason had graduated 3 years earlier. Their casual relationship soon turned romantic, though they had no plans to marry or live together at the time. Jason still lived with his parents in Brard, while Michelle lived in Raleigh, and they saw each other on weekends or during Jason's business trips. During one meeting, Michelle revealed she was pregnant. Although they were young and focused on their careers, she decided to keep the baby. Jason took a month to come to terms with the situation and moved closer to her. After a few months, they married, but not for love or because of the pregnancy. Health and insurance costs could have made childbirth prohibitive, so marriage offered a means to share the burden. Their daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth, arrived in the spring of 2004. Michelle threw herself into domestic life, aided by her mother and younger sister, while Jason's temper kept the atmosphere tense. The family tried to avoid conflicts and accepted him as part of the household. Later that year, they moved into a large house in a quiet neighborhood. Michelle's mother, Linda, visited to help with chores and sensed the strain, as Jason's temper often sparked arguments. Michelle downplayed these incidents but confided in her mother about the true state of their relationship, which felt ominous. When Cassidy was just 2, Michelle learned she was pregnant again, and she worried about telling Jason. He reacted calmly and seemed happy about the news. They went to share the news with Jason's parents, spending the weekend with relatives. On Monday, they left Cassidy with the grandparents for a few hours and went out to dinner to celebrate. On the drive home, Jason was at the wheel when the car overturned and went off the road into a ravine. They emerged frightened with a few scrapes and bruises, but Michelle had suffered a miscarriage. Michelle worried, yet Jason remained calm about the accident. Earlier, during a business trip, Jason had met an old college friend named Michelle Money. Michelle Money visited, speaking of her unhappy family life while praising Jason and telling his wife she was lucky to be pregnant. They began calling each other daily and meeting in secret, with Jason justifying his absences as work-related. In the summer of 2006, Michelle learned she was pregnant again, but Jason's reaction was cold and unhappy, which she attributed to the prior miscarriage. That November, with Michelle 5 months pregnant, Jason left on a $300 million business trip. That night, after a long call with her best friend about family troubles and a recent argument with her husband, Jason departed around 10 o'clock. Jason checked into a hotel, claiming exhaustion from travel, yet he spent hours surveying every entrance, exit, and security camera, quietly laying the groundwork for an undetected departure and return, and crafting an alibi for an act he planned at dawn. He then phoned Meredith, asking for help, explaining that he wanted to surprise his wife with a piece of jewelry for their anniversary, but the order confirmation had been sent to their home by mistake. Although Meredith did not trust him, she agreed to assist. Meredith reached her sister's house by way of a discreet door in the garage that only relatives knew about, and that was habitually left unlocked. The house felt unusually quiet, yet Michelle's keys, wallet, and crucial papers remained in the halls, suggesting she had not left. Upstairs, the bedroom door stood wide open. When Meredith called, there was no response from Michelle or her daughter. Inside, Meredith confronted a grim scene. Michelle lay near the bed, her head badly injured, and the room bore dark stains while the walls, furniture, and floor showed marks of a violent struggle. Tiny footprints tracked beside the body, and the little girl, Cassidy, unharmed, looked on with a puzzled expression as she had spent many hours by her mother's side. Meredith rushed to call for help. A subsequent forensic examination revealed a pattern of injuries to Michelle, including contusions, abrasions, and fractures. Even teeth had suffered damage, and a heavy object seemed to have been used. A pillow bearing signs of suffocation lay beside her. The investigation found nothing stolen, indicating the act was aimed solely at Michelle. There were no clear signs of forced entry or broken locks, suggesting the perpetrator had access through a key or a hidden door known to relatives. Normally, Jason would be the prime suspect, yet his alibi appeared solid. He claimed to have checked into the hotel and remained there until morning, later attending a business meeting. Hotel records supported his card usage, but investigators uncovered irregularities as the case unfolded. An employee reported the fire escape had been left open and propped with a rock. Reviewing footage showed the camera had been tampered with on the night in question, and the last recording from Jason's room appeared about half an hour after his check-in. Later that night, a man resembling Jason stopped at a gas station between the hotel and the scene. When asked for identification as required by the station's rules, he refused, paid in cash, and hurried away before receiving change. An on-call attendant identified him as Jason, but he denied involvement, claiming he had slept in the hotel. Yet his conduct aroused suspicion. The day before the tragedy, he had placed more than 24 calls to his wife Michelle and 5 to his former mistress Michelle Money, each under 15 seconds, suggesting a state of agitation. Notably, these calls came from outside the hotel, contradicting his claim of staying in the room all night. He was late for a scheduled business meeting and appeared distracted. While these episodes were troubling, they did not prove guilt, and Jason managed to maintain his ordinary life for almost 3 years. He even won custody of his young daughter, a heavy blow to Michelle's family. The case reopened in 2012 with new evidence. Witnesses saw his distinctive white car near his home on the night of the incident. A child psychologist testified about his daughter reenacting a disturbing scene with her dog, and Jason's former mistress, Michelle Money, spoke of his mood swings and sudden temper, and that he had confided in her about marital troubles. This testimony helped convict Jason of assaulting his pregnant wife, and he received a life sentence without parole. As a result, Cassidy was left with no parents, her mother was no longer alive, and her father remained imprisoned for the case. Cassidy is now in the care of her maternal aunt. Thomas Hawks and his brother Jim Hawks grew up on a California farm, sharing a love for surfing and exploring the open sea. They decided to sell their prized yacht, a move that would draw them into a grim turn of events. Under a sunlit sky, they set off on a final voyage with a prospective buyer ready to close the deal as the sails filled and the waves whispered their secrets. They sailed into the unknown, unaware that this journey would become their ultimate fate. Thomas Hawks and his brother Jim were raised in the heart of California and shared a passion for the sea. Thomas answered the call of duty, leaving the ocean's embrace to serve in the military and defending in Vietnam, earning the status of a veteran. He later pursued justice as a probation officer, and Jim's life moved along a parallel path. Meanwhile, Jim's path ran alongside his brother's, a thread that would become part of this larger story. Thomas's journey in uniform began as an aspiring officer and culminated in the honored role of police chief. A devoted bodybuilder, he shaped his physique as a living symbol of his steadfast resolve. Life unfolded with marriage and 2 sons, Ryan and Matthew, though the union eventually ended in divorce. Thomas relocated to Prescott, Arizona to begin anew, his sons following to join him there. There he met Jackie, and their friendship blossomed into a deep love. She carried scars from a past accident that left her unable to bear children, yet she welcomed Thomas's sons as her own. Together they faced life's demands with unwavering determination, their shared dream a vessel that would symbolize their hard work. They saved and bought a 55-foot yacht christened Well Deserved, a name their circle deemed fitting for such achievement. They upgraded the boat with the latest technology and set their retirement years on a course along the west coast into Mexico's exotic shores, California's rugged coast, and Catalina Island's enchantment. 2 years on, one of Thomas's sons started a family, bringing the promise of a grandchild and renewed joy. They began to rethink life in Arizona and decided to return to be near family, choosing to part with the beloved vessel. In Newport Beach, California, they put the yacht on the market, bypassing traditional brokers to save on commissions. In November of 2004, they listed the Well Deserved at $435,000, confident in its meticulous upkeep. Yet fate had other plans, and the listing opened a new chapter they could not have foreseen. When they answered the advertisement, the Hawks met Skylar Dillion, a surprisingly young man who explained that his wealth came from a childhood acting career, including time with the mighty Morphin Power Rangers and various commercials. He offered a full cash deal, enhanced by an extra $115,000 for personal items he wished to keep aboard the boat. To ease the Hawks' misgivings, he came with his pregnant wife, Jennifer Henderson, and their young child, presenting a cordial, family-like front that gradually reassured them. Yet behind that friendly surface, Skylar and Jennifer were concealing a perilous deceit that would bring consequences. The C trial, a routine step in the sale, was set for November 15th, 2004. Earlier, on November 12th, they had a bittersweet trip to Santa Catalina Island near the Los Angeles coast to mark the impending sale in one last sale. Friends and family were told a buyer had been found and the sale would close on the 15th. On the morning of the rendezvous, Skylar and his wife arrived with two men, a slender one and a muscular one. The Hawks were surprised, but Skylar quickly dismissed their worries, saying the pair were merely acquaintances, and he introduced the well-built man as his accountant. Jennifer and the child stayed ashore while the others boarded and headed into open waters, leaving behind their familiar world. As the yacht slipped into the sea, the voyage carried the quiet promise of a routine, even as the party's true intent remained hidden. Carter Ford, the port captain and a close friend of the Hawks, looked forward to their evening meeting with anticipation. But as night settled over Newport Harbor, a troubling message arrived. The sea trial had stretched longer than expected, and the buyer's group kept them out on the water. The Hawks pledged to report when they returned, and that promise would be the last anyone heard. When dawn came, the yacht returned to Newport Beach, but the couple was nowhere to be found, leaving a puzzling mystery behind. A mystery deepened as they seemed to vanish without a trace. Days passed with no word to their loved ones, and their phones stayed silent. Jackie's SUV was missing too, fueling talk of a sudden road trip to savor recent financial success and to unplug from the world. But the cheerful explanation dissolved when it became clear the Hawks were not away on holiday. Something darker had occurred. Only after a full week did the absence become a cause for alarm. The family turned to Carter Ford, begging him to go out to the well and investigate. Ford boarded the boat, troubled by what he found, a disarrayed scene and a lone white towel hanging from a porthole. The family filed a missing persons report, and detectives moved in, carefully breaking the cabin lock and searching inside. There were no signs of violence, but a menacing presence seemed to linger in the shadows. A white towel stained with fresh ink lay between the bed and the wall, prompting unsettling questions. A nearby receipt listed bleach, cleaning supplies, heavy-duty trash bags, and Tums. The investigators began tying the items together, cleaning products and bags suggesting preparation to remove traces and dispose of evidence, with bleach for erasing signs and Tums perhaps for settling an unsettled stomach after a disturbing experience. The boat's secrets began to frighten everyone who entered, and the detectives pressed on to uncover the truth about the yacht buyers, Skylar and Jennifer. A surveillance detail followed them closely, revealing them as ordinary in daily life, volunteers at a church and Jennifer a hairdresser. Yet a grimmer portrait emerged as records showed Skylar Dillion had a prior burglary conviction and was on probation. Financial checks showed the couple bore debt totaling $887,000. How they managed to purchase a yacht while financially strained puzzled investigators. Further, Skylar's claim of fame on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers proved to be modest, limited to a few uncredited appearances. The pair lived in Jennifer's parents' garage, their motives still unclear as investigators pursued the truth. The idea that a yacht purchase aligned with their finances didn't hold up, leaving investigators puzzled as they dug deeper. Dillion was grilled intensively, yet he clung to the claim that the vessel had been bought legally. He also admitted that the money stemmed from drug sales. He handed over a briefcase full of laundered cash from Mexico, mostly in $100 bills, to Tom. Skylar said the Hawks had asked him to help set up a bank account in Mexico so they could start anew there, and that Tom and Jackie had given him power of attorney to control their money and send it to Mexico. He produced what looked like a real power of attorney document with signatures that seemed authentic. Although he denied any role in the Hawks' disappearance and suggested they might have gone to Mexico, doubts persisted. Cell phone records placed the Hawks' phones near the Mexican border the day after the sea trial. Frustrated, Detective I-4 returned to the drawing board and redirected focus toward the Hawks family, prioritizing the couple's safety. To seek answers, investigators turned to national news, where a family member appeared on camera appealing for help. The case drew international attention as its twists and turns captivated people worldwide. An American in Mexico called after spotting the car on television, prompting action. Mexican authorities went to a house near Enada and recovered the Hawks' car. Although the Hawks had been missing for more than a month, there was cautious hope that this might be the breakthrough. A Mexican federal agent led the investigation. The names Skylar, Dillian, and Jennifer surfaced in Spanish discussions. The man at the door was an old surfing buddy of Skylar who casually recalled that Skylar had entrusted him with the car and that Jennifer, his pregnant wife, had driven him back to the United States. Inside the car, investigators collected samples and found Skylar's DNA on a heater knob, a potential link that raised suspicions of involvement. The discovery fueled suspicions of foul play, with Skylar and Jennifer thought to hold key information, though solid proof remained elusive. A new line of inquiry emerged when investigators reviewed the power of attorney theory, noting that Tom and Jackie had allowed outsiders access to their accounts. Notary Kathleen Harris supported Skylar's account, saying she had witnessed the Hawks signing the papers and confirming identities with fingerprints. The detectives decided to press Harris for further confirmation. With these threads in hand, investigators pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. Tom and Jackie Hawks lie at the heart of a case, and though her description of Tom is precise, her portrayal of Jackie raises questions. She claimed Jackie wore brown curly hair, but in truth, she had cut her long curls into a spiky blonde style. Was this confusion or a hidden cover-up? The power of attorney appeared authentic, with fingerprints matching and signatures that seemed legitimate. Yet concerns lingered as the case was handed to the FBI, and the finest handwriting analysts were brought in. Their findings surprised. Tom's signature proved genuine, as did Jackie's, though an odd feature in Jackie's script puzzled investigators. Following that unsettling revelation, investigators learned Skylar planned to flee and had asked his probation officer for permission to depart the country, enabling swift action to arrest him for money laundering, a crime he had admitted earlier. Investigators then went to the garage apartment tied to Jennifer's parents and found belongings of Tom and Jackie, including a camera and their driver's licenses. Looking at Jackie's license photo, they saw a striking resemblance to the notary's description, deepening doubts about her involvement and the legitimacy of her actions. The inquiry took a darker turn, hinting that more people might be connected to the puzzling disappearance than initially thought. In the garage, a business card for an LAPD detective who worked with Interpol was found, prompting a contact with the Interpol liaison to discuss Skylar's possible role. The Interpol agent recalled a prior encounter with Skylar 1 year earlier during a case in Mexico involving an American citizen, suggesting a link to both cases. The main challenge remained gathering solid evidence. Photos from the yacht showed a discrepancy. 2 anchors appeared, while only one existed, widening suspicions. A chilling theory took shape, that the absence of a second anchor pointed to Skylar's ruse to hide a plan to steal a prized possession. The net tightened around the circle of suspects. Jennifer's actions pointed to her involvement, as her attempt to drain Hawk's account indicated awareness of the scheme, even though she was not aboard the vessel. At a decisive moment, detectives found a name in the power of attorney papers belonging to a man who had witnessed the key transaction. 19-year-old Alonzo, a prison guard living with his parents, formed a wary alliance with Skylar during Skylar's imprisonment for theft. Skylar persuaded Alonzo to attend meetings and even accompany him on a sea trial, offering leniency in Skylar's punishment. They agreed on a delicate arrangement, urging Alonzo to share his perspective and unveil what they called the Hawk's destiny. As the tape rolled, Alonzo spoke of a man named John Fitzgerald Kennedy, presented by Skylar as an accountant, but known as a notorious gang member and former convict named John F. Kennedy. They had plotted a dangerous scheme against the Hawks, abduct a couple and cast them overboard. Kennedy feigned seasickness and slipped below, drawing Thomas away, who then entered their trap. Skylar followed, and together they overpowered Thomas, while Jackie asked worried questions as Alonzo restrained her. Thomas and Jackie were bound with their eyes and mouths taped, while Alonzo offered a fleeting gesture of comfort by stroking Jackie's hand. The group moved to the galley, where a power of attorney awaited signatures and a chilling ultimatum hung in the air: cooperate for possible mercy, resist and face a grim fate. The vessel steered toward the Pacific near Catalina Island, a place Tom and Jackie had once cherished. On deck they were tied with rope as the anchor was disengaged and dragged along its chain, the dreadful sound echoing through the boat. Jackie pleaded for life, and Tom reassured her that they would stay together, even as they were cast into the sea and vanished beneath the waves. Their fate remained a mystery, their bodies never recovered. With that grim deed done, Schuyler began a new cruel mission to eliminate. When evidence of the Hawks' involvement surfaced, he gathered their precious belongings, photographs among them, and cast them into the deep sea, letting memories fade and erasing every trace of the couple. Dillian and John F. Kennedy sought normalcy, returning toward Newport Harbor to relax and fish as if the horrifying events were only a troubling dream. Justice soon closed in on Schuyler Dillian, John F. Kennedy, and Alonzo Backhind as they faced 2 counts of a grave crime. Jennifer Henderson defended her husband's innocence while herself facing 2 counts, with evidence of her complicity revealed. The acts were driven by greed. Mayan Gardner, a former convict and ex-gang member, connected Dillian to John F. Kennedy. Though he did not participate, he faced charges as an accessory after the fact. Verdicts from separate juries found all parties responsible. Jennifer Henderson received 2 life terms in October 2007 with no possibility of parole. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was given the ultimate penalty on May 1, 2009, and was held at San Quentin State Prison. Alonzo Mine testified against the others, pleaded guilty, and received a lighter sentence of 20 years and 4 months with parole eligibility in September 2021. In March 2009, Mayan Gardner's life changed after 4 years in prison when he pleaded guilty to being an accessory after the fact, leading to the dismissal of the charges tied to the deed. Meanwhile, Schuyler Dillian, still in detention, faced further accusations that he had asked another inmate to carry out a grim plan against his own relatives. The case took a darker turn when Dillian was linked to the loss of life of an American named John Jarvie in Mexico in 2003. Dillian's cousin and father, connected to the Jarvie matter, were considered key witnesses in both cases. On September 22nd, jury selection began for Schuyler Dillian's trial. Dillian stood trial for the losses of life of Thomas and Jackie Hawks, as well as John Jarvie. The verdict was announced on April 10, 2009, and Judge Frank Feisel sentenced Dillian to the maximum penalty, and he was placed in the same facility. Before his final confinement, it emerged that in March 2008, he harmed himself in an act tied to gender transition, and he later changed his name from John Julius Jacobson to Schuyler. Schuyler Dillian chose a gender-neutral name to reflect her evolving identity. Defense lawyers argued that money for sex reassignment surgery supplied the hidden motive behind the Hawks case, but such motives do not justify the acts from 2019. Dillian's gender was legally changed to female, and she is now known as Schuyler. The Hawks family treasures the memory of Thomas and Jackie forever in their hearts. They were lively, adventurous souls who embodied kindness and genuineness. Their paths took a harsh turn, and though they are no longer with us, their spirits continue to illuminate our recollections. May they rest in eternal peace. The Lorena Leonore Bobbitt case of the early 90s drew worldwide attention, prompting discussions about domestic violence and the complexity of marital assault. Lorena was born on May 15, 1970, in Bur, eastern Ecuador near Chimazo, the youngest child in a modest family. After moving to Venezuela as a child, she grew bright, diligent, and goal-oriented. Following her father's death and a strained relationship with her mother, Elia Gallo, she moved to the United States to live with her cousin, Yana Basti, who helped with the visa. Conservatively minded, she lived under strict rules in her cousin's home, while pursuing opportunities in the beauty industry, training as a manicurist with the help of her aunt, who owned a Central City salon. The case and the notoriety of the Bobbitt surname became a touchstone for discussions about vulnerability and the consequences of humiliation, showing how hurt can remain hidden for years and erupt with devastating force. The surname even entered common language as a reference and gave rise to a colloquial verb describing drastic actions. 8 months after moving to a new country, a young woman settled in, began college, and worked as a manicurist in a relative's salon while saving money. In September 1988, Lorena prepared to attend a party with friends. Her aunt offered strict guidance on behavior and curfew, assuring her that everything would go smoothly. Nervous about her first late-night outing, she chose a modest outfit, applied makeup, and styled her hair before joining her friends. Inside the nightclub, the carefree, festive mood drew people to dance and mingle, and Lorena thought such places might hold the man of her dreams. Moments later, a handsome, tall, charismatic young man caught her eye, smiled, waved, and approached. He introduced himself as John Wayne Bobbitt, and his charm showed in his jokes and well-timed compliments. They spent the evening dancing and talking, and afterward he walked her to her aunt's home, where he asked for her number and promised to call. John Wayne Bobbitt was born on March 24, 1967 in Buffalo, in the northwestern part of New York. He was the youngest of 3 children. When he was 3, his father passed away, and his mother, overwhelmed by the loss, ended up in a psychiatric clinic after a serious nervous breakdown. The aunt and uncle, devout and strict, raised the children, and they attended church every Sunday and did charity work. John did not stand out academically, but he did reasonably well, and as a teenager he aimed for a military career. After completing the necessary training at a military academy, he joined the Marines, where he proved brave, disciplined, and determined. Yet, after a few years, the rigid regime wore on him, and with some military experience, he later took a job as a security guard at a popular venue, though he changed positions frequently and did not stay long. The day after they met, John kept his promise and asked Lorena for a date. They wandered through the park, chatting easily about many topics, and John made it clear he wished to continue their relationship. Lorena's aunt insisted she introduce her boyfriend before they could pursue anything serious. John accepted the condition, and on the appointed day he joined Lorena for dinner at the home of a relative named Bobbitt. Bobbitt was gracious, courteous, and considerate, yet he also tried to appear earnest. After a private talk with the stern guardian, Lorena was allowed to keep seeing John. 6 months into their relationship, John proposed and Lorena accepted, dreaming of a family, children, and a home. Shortly after Lorena turned 19, they made their union official in June 1989. The wedding was modest. They could not afford a lavish ceremony and spent their savings on a honeymoon by the warm coast. Their parents were absent, while aunts and uncles joined to share in the joy. After the wedding, the couple moved to Virginia, settling in a quiet part of Manassas. The first months together felt like a fairy tale filled with mutual tenderness and care. As 1990 approached, the atmosphere began to sour. Lorena tried to ignore some of John's rude remarks, hoping it would pass, but one evening when she served cooled soup, he hurled the plate to the floor and shouted at her, belittling her as a homemaker. He kept a close watch on her movements and on who she spoke to at home. Intimacy came only at his insistence. She kept her troubles to herself, overwhelmed by shame. On June 22, 1993, he and a longtime military companion went out to a social venue, leaving Lorena at home. They returned late, and around 3 in the morning he wasted no time, tearing the shirt from his sleeping wife. Lorena hardly understood what was happening as her husband confronted her. On a night when her husband forced himself on her, she begged him to stop, tears streaming, but he paid her pleas no heed. When it was over, John collapsed beside her and drifted into sleep. Lorena, trembling and crying, moved to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and tried to steady herself. Her gaze fell on a stand of large, sharp kitchen knives, and her hand moved almost of its own accord to a carving knife. She returned to the bedroom where he lay on his back, snoring and intoxicated, and with her left hand she seized his genitals and with a swift stroke severed a large portion. John leapt up in agony as Lorena walked out of the room, went to the garage and climbed into her car, speeding away through the deserted streets. Only at a traffic light did she become aware of what she held. Her hands bore the stains, and she realized she was still gripping the severed fragment. She rolled down the window, discarded the piece, and continued driving. Lorena drove to a close friend's house, who was stunned by the late-night visit and the state she was in. After Lorena explained what had happened, the friend called the police and summoned medical help to the scene. At the house, emergency care was required as the wounded man pressed a sheet to the wound, trying to slow the crisis. They knew the groin region hosts a major vessel, and the injury threatened his life, but a clot formed, delaying the worst. Responders arrived, transported him to the nearest hospital, where he received urgent medical attention. The question of the severed part's location persisted, but Lorena indicated the approximate stretch of road where she had discarded it. After an extensive search, authorities recovered the fragment, cleaned it with antiseptic, and placed it in a sterile container with cooling conditions for transport to the hospital. A surgeon from the state capitol arrived, astonished by the complexity of the case, yet he proceeded with a procedure lasting more than 9 hours and achieved remarkable results. Despite the traumatic amputation and the fragment having lay on the road for more than 1 hour, all tissues and vessels were reconnected successfully. After the incident, the victim recovered quickly, and Lorena was arrested that night for questioning about the circumstances and motives behind her act. She immediately confessed, sharing a harrowing history that had driven her to such a desperate decision. She described years of marriage that had become a nightmare, with her husband repeatedly abusing her emotionally and physically and forcing intimacy on his terms. She recalled that about a year earlier he had compelled her to terminate a pregnancy she deeply desired, and that abortion had been a traumatizing experience. As for the night itself, she said she remembered little, as if she were walking in a fog. She narrated how her husband came home intoxicated, took advantage of her, and despite her attempts to resist, his behavior continued. After the incident, she went to the kitchen for water, and the next thing she remembered was his scream, the roar of the car engine, and a portion of his anatomy in her grasp as she sat behind the wheel. The case sparked a major media stir, with many women who endured domestic violence and feminist organizations rallying to her side. In the early 1990s, such cases highlighted how society often blamed victims who endured abuse, expecting wives to be submissive and viewing violence as the wife's fault. Meanwhile, many men sided with John, fearing Lorena's act could inspire others in similar circumstances. Official statistics of the period indicated millions of women faced comparable abuse. 2 parallel court cases opened almost simultaneously. Lorena charged her husband with taking advantage of her that night, while she testified about years of abuse, emotional mistreatment, and coercion, including the forced abortion. John's testimony was muddled. He denied the allegations, yet much of Lorena's account was corroborated by the facts, such as his lack of steady employment, though he enjoyed social outings that were often achieved through coercion or deceit. He took money from his wife to fund his schemes. Lorena's friends observed bruises and scrapes on her, and she had long endured a state of sadness, yet she rarely spoke up. The court concluded that the husband had subjected her to emotional and physical mistreatment throughout their marriage, driving her to desperation. However, regarding the charge of intimate violence from the night of June 23, 1993, there was not enough evidence, and John was acquitted. He offered several versions of what had happened that evening, and the jury of 9 women and 3 men found him not culpable. In the autumn of that year, Lorena's trial began, September 1993, charged with causing serious harm to her husband. Her lawyers argued that she acted while suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder caused by the ongoing mistreatment. A psychiatric evaluation confirmed she acted in a distressed state, unaware of her actions, and thus not legally responsible. In early January of the following year, after nearly 8 hours of deliberation, the jury concluded she could not be held criminally responsible, as she was in a state of insanity. She was ordered to complete a 6-week treatment program at a specialized clinic before resuming her life. The couple divorced in 1995, and Lorena returned to her maiden name. John remained resentful and sought to capitalize on the notoriety, founding his own band called Severed Parts, but the group failed to attract interest. In the late 1990s, he accepted roles in adult entertainment and appeared in several productions, though public interest faded. He continued making talk show appearances for a while, but opportunities waned. He later worked as a bartender in a Las Vegas venue and in his 50s took on various jobs to make ends meet, including moving, driving, and delivering pizzas. In 1999, he received a suspended sentence for theft connected to the high-profile case. Journalists later revealed he had a son named Andrew, born in 1992, to Beatrice Williams. In 1994, he faced charges of assaulting his new girlfriend, Christina L. Lorena, a former nightclub dancer, spent 15 days in jail and received probation in the early 2000s. Her ex-husband, John, faced 3 arrests for assault against his wife, Joanna Farrell, and he served 1 year for violating probation, with their divorce finalized in 2004. Unlike him, Lorena avoided scandal and stayed out of the spotlight. In 1996, she returned to her native Ecuador, where her mother Elia lived at the time. Yet 6 months later, Elia accused her of assault. The matter was resolved without court action, and the 2 women continued to live together. A year after that, Lorena returned to the United States and opened a small beauty salon in Washington. In 2007, she founded Lena's Red Wagon, a foundation dedicated to helping women who had endured domestic violence. Soon after, Lorena agreed to grant an interview for the first time in years, appearing on CBS News Morning Show, where she discussed life after the incident. She also appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show in the mid-2000s. Lorena remarried a man named Dave Bellinger, with whom she had a daughter in 2006. She preferred not to dwell on her marriage to Bob and said she did not follow his life after their divorce in 2009. Nearly 15 years after their sensational court battles had ended, the former spouses met face-to-face on the show Insider. John apologized for how he had treated her during their marriage and said he still loved her. Lorena was visibly moved and confirmed that every year on Valentine's Day, her ex-husband still sends her flowers and cards. On the morning of May 25, 2013, Marshall University celebrated the graduation of a new cadre of professionals. Mark and Joanna McDermott were to be among the parents witnessing their children receive diplomas, but their day took an unexpected turn. This is the story of Mark McDermott, a model family man who faced betrayal by someone he had trusted as his own son for nearly 2 decades. Born in the early 1960s in Australia, he was the eldest of 5 siblings, with his father Bruce McDermott and 2 younger sisters, Tracy and Nicole, the youngest. Close acquaintances described Mark as not only a successful businessman, but also a kind and responsive person. Nicole portrayed him as someone who would never deliberately harm anyone. Very little information is available about Mark's life, including his adult years. At some point, Mark traveled to the southern United States, and the circumstances and reasons for this journey remain unknown. Mark Dunn met Joanna, a working single mother with a 4-year-old son, Donald Wayne Dunn. Most information about Joanna comes from her own accounts, and what she publicly shared was almost entirely about her son, who is central to this story. Donald Wayne Dunn was born in the early 1990s in West Virginia, where he lived with his mother's family, his grandparents playing a major role in his upbringing. Because Joanna found it hard to raise a child alone, she entrusted much of his upbringing to her parents. Even when they managed to be together, Joanna often turned to video games and television to entertain Donald, leaving her with little time to give him her full attention. Everything changed when Mark entered their lives. The couple quickly started a relationship and soon married, Joanna adopting Mark's surname and the trio moving to West Virginia. From the start, Mark and Donald formed a bond that felt familial. Friends and Mark's relatives observed that Mark treated Donald as his own son and Donald regarded him as his father. Their bond persisted through a rough period that led to a temporary separation, during which Donald insisted on living with Mark. When Joanna was diagnosed with cancer, the family supported one another through the ordeal. Mark made sure Donald never lacked anything and lived a comfortable, undemanding life. In 2008, after Donald's high school graduation, Mark covered his college costs at Rio Noe Community College for 2 years. In 2010, Donald transferred to Marshall University, still supported by Mark and Joanna, even after living with his girlfriend, whom he had dated since he was 15, and her family, with their help extending beyond tuition to clothing, car insurance, and living and food expenses, allowing him to focus on his studies during his 5 years in higher education. He was a responsible and dedicated student, strictly following a routine and often canceling plans with loved ones to prepare for exams. Saturday, May 25, 2013, promised to be a milestone for Donald, who was due to receive his diploma that day. As his family prepared to celebrate, tension intruded the home, turning what should have been a moment of pride into a scene of grave distress. A 911 call came from the Might home, and Joanna McDermott told the dispatcher that she and her husband had argued, and in a moment of rage he stopped breathing. She insisted it was not an accident, and that the conflict had erupted on what was meant to be his graduation day. Sergeant Greg Kean of the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office arrived to find Joanna in a state of shock and Mark lifeless on the living room couch, where he had been reading when the end came. Initial findings noted 2 wounds to the head and a third in the back of the shoulder. The medical examiner determined that the injuries caused a fatal ending, though not instantaneous, and that a substantial loss of life fluid had occurred. Noise from the shower had muffled the sounds, so Donald did not realize his stepfather's fate until he emerged from the bathroom to discover the scene. Joanna, 54, and her 23-year-old son were then transported to the sheriff's office to give statements, as the circumstances suggested another domestic violence case ending tragically. A letter lay on the dining table beside a pistol addressed to Donald. In it, Joanna explained that the marriage had become intolerable, and she could not remain in a relationship she no longer loved, apologizing for leaving him without seeing him grow into a man. From the interview, it emerged that Joanna described a quarrel that escalated into an act she did not fully anticipate. The pistol discharged toward Mark, leaving him with fatal head injuries. The account left investigators with a sober sense of the fragility of family life and the irreversible consequences of violence within a home. After the doors of the patrol car closed, Joanna disclosed that it was not she who ended Mark's life, but her son Donald. Yet that revelation opened a far more intricate chapter than investigators had anticipated. In the interrogation room, Joanna recounted the sequence of events on May 25, 2013. Her son's graduation had been scheduled earlier that day. In the morning, she had left to run errands and buy groceries. Upon returning, Donald asked her to close her eyes and follow him into the house because he had a surprise for her. Trusting her son, she walked with him to the dining room and sat as he urged her to do so. At that moment, Joanna heard a distinctive click, and when she turned to face Donald, she found the pistol in his grasp. The weapon did not discharge. Frightened, she managed to wrench it away and regain control, steadied by a clear plan to survive what could have been her final confrontation with Donald. Seeing Mark lying motionless, she told Donald she would call for help and assume responsibility for what had occurred, even though it was not hers to bear. Although he doubted at first, he eventually agreed. Joanna explained that she chose to call emergency services to protect herself from her son, knowing that confessing to a crime she had not committed would land her in jail, and fearing that otherwise Donald would become a serious threat. She added that in 23 years as his mother, she never imagined he would aim the pistol at her. The pistol belonged to Joanna. It did not discharge, probably because she had drawn the slide back far enough on the semi-automatic. Captain James Barr found Joanna's account entirely plausible. From the first moment he saw Donald, he sensed something was off, and the gravity of the situation made the 23-year-old appear unusually calm, maintaining a neutral expression throughout. He ordered Donald isolated in a separate interrogation room away from his mother. From the outset, Donald denied involvement in his stepfather's passing. His facade crumbled when he learned of Joanna's statements. Barr did not rely on intimidation, nor did he press for exhaustive details, allowing the proceedings to unfold and the full picture to emerge. Following his first year at college, Donald's grades fell, and he decided to leave the program. In the early days, the courses seemed manageable, and simply turning up in the right room at the right time could yield decent marks. But as the term progressed, more effort was required, and Donald felt he lacked the strength to continue. Instead of being honest, he deceived his parents, Mark and Joanna, and his girlfriend and her family remained unaware of what was really happening. Rachel Rush, the sister of his girlfriend, described a routine that made it look as if he was attending classes. He would leave and return at regular hours, spending most of his day in his room under the pretense of needing focus for assignments. He even forged grade reports, and this deception endured for 4.5 years without anyone suspecting a thing. His family kept trusting him, unaware that he was misusing the money they provided to support him. Donald claimed he never intended to deceive them for so long, but telling the truth grew harder with each day. The one thing stopping him from confessing was the fear that Mark and Joanna would withdraw their support. The lure of material comforts, such as a car or fancy clothes, mattered little compared to losing his easy lifestyle. Over the following months, he drafted a drastic plan to escape scrutiny, including leaving a note on the dining table next to a pistol to mislead investigators about a distressed marriage. On May 25th, he told Captain Barr that he secretly took his mother's pistol and kept it with him all day while pretending to prepare for his graduation, even trying to create an alibi by visiting the supermarket so cameras would record him. The plan collapsed when the pistol jammed as he aimed at his mother. Later, he admitted he had rehearsed the expressions he would wear when authorities arrived and weighed how to support himself after losing the steady income, intending to rely on relatives for as long as they helped and to take up sports to improve his condition, with no other options in sight. A West Virginia Supreme Court document issued in April 2016 states that after his arrest in June 2013, Donald faced charges of first-degree homicide and attempted homicide. While awaiting trial, Donald and his defense team sought to delay proceedings. During solitary confinement, he underwent surgery on his right hand, which his lawyers used as a pretext to request a delayed start, arguing he would be heavily medicated. The court first required medical records, but the request was denied, with the judge noting that Donald showed no signs of impairment from painkillers and was able to participate in proceedings. The trial proceeded in August 2014, more than a year after Mark McDermott's passing. Judge John A. Hutchinson presided, David White defended Donald, Christine Keller represented the Raleigh County prosecutor. Mark's 2 sisters and 1 niece traveled over 15,000 kilometers from Australia to witness a case affecting a family they had known for nearly 2 decades. Although detailed witness testimony and evidence were not publicly available, the defense planned to argue that Donald was under illegal substances at the time of the crime, a point not supported by toxicology results. On August 14, 2014, Donald Dunn was found guilty of the homicide of his stepfather, of attempting to harm his mother, and of using a firearm in the course of the offense. On September 5, 2014, Judge John Hutchinson sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the stepfather's homicide and an additional 15 years for the attempted harm to his mother. After the sentence, Joanna read an emotional letter noting that something difficult had occurred in her son's life, perhaps linked to his grandparents' illness or the pressure to study at university, and she suggested that exposure to violent games during his youth may have contributed. She also expressed disagreement with the public image of her son and with the severity of the sentence. Judge Hutchinson stated that Joanna's disapproval did not sway his decision, insisting the sentence was necessary to restore justice in this unjust situation. He acknowledged sympathy for Donald's mother, yet affirmed that shielding her son from consequences could not be justified given the severity of the circumstances. After the verdict, Mark's sister and father expressed ongoing disbelief that Donald could take the life of a man who had raised him for 19 years, while conceding that Mark would never be returned by the ruling. They nevertheless welcomed the judgment delivered by Judge Hutchinson. In the early hours of July 7, 1985, 54-year-old Jane Anchor Hilton was found in a bedroom at her employer's house, having sustained fatal injuries. She had moved there the day before, seeking refuge from a troubled marriage. 2 fellow housemates and her daughter Autumn discovered her. The case remained perplexing for 14 years until 2 new detectives reopened the cold case in 1999. A misquotation in a newspaper article led investigators to focus on Ricky Davis. Davis was tried for the crime and convicted, steadfast in his innocence. 15 years later, he was exonerated, and the true culprit was identified thanks to genetic genealogy testing and the work of the Innocence Project. Jane had been a familiar figure in El Dorado Hills, California, where she wrote for Foothill Times and covered local social events. She loved her 6 children and often wrote poetry to inspire them. She had been pursuing a real estate license and was married to Archie Hilton in 1984. By July of the following year, their marriage had begun to falter, and she sought help from her employer, Will M. Klein, who owned a substantial home in El Dorado Hills. The household also included Klein's daughter, Maureen Klein, and her boyfriend, Ricky Davis, along with his girlfriend, Connie Dahl. On the 6th of July, 1985, Will M. Klein welcomed Jane and her youngest daughter, Autumn, into her home, a crowded household by all accounts. That first night would prove fatal. Ricky Davis, 20, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl, 19, returned from a party to find Autumn lingering outside, anxious that her mother would be upset. Inside, a quiet tension filled the hallway as they entered the home. In the first room, Jane Hilton, a woman known to them, lay on a bed, and she did not survive. Maureen and her boyfriend had gone away on a camping trip and were not at home. Ricky and Connie called for help, and soon paramedics and police arrived. Jane Hilton was pronounced to have come to the end of her course at the scene. She had endured numerous injuries and a bite on her shoulder, and the act that ended her life was described as senseless by investigators. The authorities began questioning those closest to her. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was interviewed and provided detectives with a solid alibi, and DNA was available for comparison. Archie had been the logical choice for scrutiny since he and Jane had been navigating a rough patch, but he insisted the marriage was not over and that there was no trouble between them. He was cleared, and the case cooled for a time. Ricky and Connie both told investigators they had returned in the early hours and found Autumn waiting outside. Upon entering, they saw stains on the hallway carpet, and a trail of marks led to the master bedroom, where Jane lay on a stained mattress. They speculated that an intruder might be involved, and the case remained unresolved for years. The cold case was reopened in 1999. El Dorado County Sheriff's detectives Richard Stracer and Rick Fitzgerald re-examined the files, poring over paperwork and revisiting every lead. A journalist's article revived interest. Connie Dahl, once Ricky's girlfriend and Jane's housemate, had given an interview in which she said the victim appeared as if placed in bed in the position she would normally sleep in. This statement seemed to contradict a recorded account that had been attributed to Ricky Davis. Detective Fitzgerald believed he heard Davis say the body had been found on the floor. Dahl, meanwhile, was in Oregon serving a sentence on unrelated charges, and investigators brought her in for questioning. The interview stretched for 3 hours, and at first Dahl stuck to her original account. Over the next 18 months, she would face 4 sessions. Investigators were later found to have used methods known to raise the likelihood of a coerced confession. Dahl was pressured to implicate Ricky Davis and Autumn in the incident, and she was threatened with a harsher charge if she did not cooperate, though she was offered a lenient sentence of manslaughter with only 1 year in custody. Stracer and Fitzgerald told Dahl that DNA evidence would be used to identify the suspect. In truth, no DNA evidence had been introduced during that period, and testing on the DNA recovered from the scene had not yet been performed, even as they showed a photograph of the scene. Investigators fed due information across 4 interviews, using details like a bike mark on Jane's shoulder, and as she listened, dough began to crack, slowly shaping a night-old account that sometimes veered into fabrication. In one account, she said Autumn was present during the act and was marked by the incident. In another, she admitted she might have bitten Jane on the shoulder. Dew described that the confrontation began with an argument between Davis and Jane. Davis allegedly wanted Autumn to join them in a party. Jane refused, and Davis reacted with anger, ending in Jane's end. Her story kept shifting to fit the Fed facts, and she could not recall the weapon or its hiding place. Dew had implicated her ex-boyfriend Davis in Jane Hilton's case. He became the prime suspect. Ricky Davis and Autumn Anker were interviewed after Connie D's confession. Both stuck to their original accounts. Detectives lied again, telling Davis that Anker had implicated him. Anker said she had no reason to shield Davis when threat of culpability was raised. Despite aggressive questioning, the investigators could not sway Davis or Anker. They used Connie D's confession to arrest Davis. Connie D was offered a plea bargain to testify against Davis at his trial. Davis's first trial ended in a mistrial. The second trial in 2005 would convict him. Dew testified about her struggle with Jane and that she herself had accidentally bitten the shoulder. She went outside as Davis continued the brutal assault on Hilton, and she heard cries and pleas as the act continued, all based on Doe's account. Based entirely on Doe's testimony, Davis received a 16-year sentence for the more serious charge tied to the fatal act. Connie D received a lesser charge of manslaughter and a year in the county jail. Connie D passed away in 2014. Meanwhile, Davis maintained his innocence and, in 2006, reached out to the Northern California Innocence Project to seek help in proving his case. The NCP, founded in 2001 by Kathleen Rodolph and Linda Starr, emerged after legislation allowed inmates to pursue DNA testing to establish innocence. It is a non-profit clinical program of Santa Clara University School of Law. After Davis made contact, his case underwent a thorough re-examination, made possible by cooperation between the NCP and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office. Following conviction, the scene's evidence was reopened, including Hilton's neck garment and traces beneath her fingernails. A male DNA profile previously unknown was found, and DNA from the nails and the garment matched the same source. The results ruled out the suspects Davis and Anker and showed that Dahl's testimony did not fit the physical record. The DNA also cleared Archie Hilton, who had already died by the time the findings were announced. The profile was entered into CODIS, yet no matches emerged. Although the results appeared to support Davis's claim of innocence, several hurdles remained. Until January 2017, California required new evidence to point unerringly to innocence, a standard viewed as almost unattainable. In 2015, false confession expert Richard Leo reviewed Dahl's interrogations and concluded that detectives used pressure to push her toward an account aligning with their beliefs about how Hilton's passing occurred. In 2016, the bill known as Senate Bill 134 allowed wrongfully convicted inmates to argue that new evidence would likely have swayed a jury. Attorney Melissa O'Connell filed for a new trial based on the new DNA testing championed by a former state senator, and the bill passed in January 2017, bringing California in line with 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malakian vacated Davis's conviction from 2005 and ordered a new trial, initially set for autumn that year, but later moved to April 2020 due to the defense attorney's health. Advances in DNA testing, especially genetic genealogy, led to Davis becoming the first person in California and the second in the United States to be exonerated through this method. Genetic genealogy is a relatively recent approach. DNA from the crime scene is sent to specialized firms, which search genealogical databases to identify potential matches. In February 2020, the evidence tied to a man once deemed unlikely to be involved. Vern Pearson, the El Dorado County prosecutor, announced a new suspect linked to the DNA found on Hilton's remains. After the arrest, many in the media referred to the man as Michael Green, a longtime Roseville resident. Green, a teenager who graduated from Oakmount High School in 1986, was described as easygoing, even-tempered, and notably laid back. According to reports, he was 17 years old when a brutal homicide connected him to a woman named Hilton. On the night of July 6, 1985, Hilton's daughter, Autumn, met Green and two friends, Calvin and Stephen, in a park. They spent time together, and Autumn told her mother she would go to another friend's house for the evening, then return to the park to rejoin the trio. What occurred next remains a matter of speculation. Investigators believe that during this interval, Green gained entry to a residence and confronted a woman named Jane in a struggle, possibly attacking her in a frenzy. When Autumn and Davis returned home, they discovered Jane's remains. Green had no prior or subsequent criminal convictions and appeared to live a normal life until DNA evidence linked him to the case. The other two boys, Calvin and Stephen, were traced soon after his arrest. Calvin had died some time earlier, while Stephen was located the following day and questioned as a witness rather than the participant. Green was arrested on February 11th, 2020. Because he was a juvenile at the time, he appeared in juvenile court on February 19th, 2020, and was granted transfer so he could be tried as an adult. He waited 2.5 years before facing the court, and on July 29th, 2022, he entered a no-contest plea, waiving his right to a jury trial and his option to challenge the plea or its consequences. Sentencing was scheduled for September 27th, 2022, before Judge Suzanne Kingsbury. At sentencing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor of psychological science education, explained adolescent development and the distinct needs of late adolescents regarding emotions and cognition. The defense called witnesses from Green's childhood, some of whom maintained ties into adulthood. Each asked whether their view of him had changed after learning of his confession. All testified that they were shaken to discover he was connected to Hilton's homicide. Friends and family remembered him as jovial, popular, funny, and loving, a portrait that endured both before and after the tragedy. Karen Green, the defendant's ex-wife, spoke after witness statements were presented. Jane Hilton's children each delivered victim impact statements conveying the profound loss their family endured. Heather Purvis McConnell, one of Jane's daughters, said the reasons behind the act and how life might have differed will haunt her forever. Brandon Hilton, the family's fourth child, declared his love for his mother and wondered what Leo would feel toward the person who stabbed his mother 29 times. He asked what he would do if an early morning call told him his mother had passed. The court listened to Heather's description of gathering her mother's belongings from the house where she fell victim. Arguth finished with a firm declaration. "We will always share a common regret for the foolish decision you made 37 years ago." Hilton's son Ian echoed his sister's feelings, describing the family's uncertainty and the recurring nightmares, especially after blame fell on his sister Autumn. He broke into tears and ended with an almost inaudible remark, "The words we speak will never restore my mother." Autumn followed, revealing the agony of 2 decades under suspicion and recounting the day detectives came to tell them they had found those responsible. She was repeatedly accused of harming her mother and helping move her remains from the floor to the bed. Autumn added that invoking a lawyer at that moment seemed to curb the intimidation, and she wondered how much farther the tactics could have gone. Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family, asking Green what prompted such acts toward Jane. The statement described the severe injuries around her head and face and quoted Green's own words about kicking her jaw and biting her shoulder, asking why. Linden added that Green did not merely end Jane, he harmed many lives in the process. He asked Green whether he had considered who Jane was, noting her achievements and the love she held for each of her children. In closing, Margaret Husher, Green's defense attorney, argued that he could not stop himself given he was an adolescent at the time, a view based on the testimony of Dr. Kaufman. She urged the court to show mercy as she cited penal codes and court rules. Judge Kingsbury interjected, saying the court is not swayed. In a courtroom session, the court moved to place Linden on probation, effectively ending any further remarks from the defense. Linden thanked the court and called the probation request offensive, insisting he had already escaped accountability for 37 years and that probation would permit him to evade even more consequences. Judge Kingsbury said she had heard a wide range of arguments in cases involving adolescent development, and after 26 years on the bench, the case tied to Jane Hilton remained the most brutal she had encountered. Before delivering the sentence, she asked the family for forgiveness for the trauma they had endured, and she expressed hope they would heal, as that would have been their mother's wish. Noting she had not originally been assigned to the matter, Kingsbury urged Green to utilize every resource available through the California Department of Rehabilitation, stating that these supports could influence the parole outcome. In her closing remarks, she mentioned that friends had spoken of a commendable side to him and that, at his current age, he could be released to lead a productive life. Green was sentenced to 15 years to life and remanded to the El Dorado County Jail for transfer to the California Department of Rehabilitation. Restitution would be determined later. Davis was released on February 13, 2020, and planned a celebratory pizza with his family. His attorney, Melissa O'Connell, said he would be entitled to more than $750,000 in state compensation for the wrongful conviction, though the amount could not compensate for the years he had spent deprived of liberty. He then filed a lawsuit against the state for damages covering May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020, totaling $18 million. The suit named El Dorado County, former detectives Richard Strayer, Rick Fitzgerald, Bill Wilson, deceased, sued through his estate, and Larry Hink, as well as the sheriff's office pathologist Dr. Robert Anthony. The Village Life newspaper reported that Davis was without a home after release. The lawsuit remained pending as of 2022. In September 2022, California enacted Assembly Bill 2644, effective January 1, 2024, prohibiting law enforcement from employing threats, physical harm, deception, or psychological manipulation during custodial interrogations of persons aged 17 or younger. The bill faced opposition, but District Attorney Van Pearson urged law enforcement to abandon such tactics, noting that a decade ago he would have viewed these methods differently, yet after witnessing their impact, he believed change is possible. The El Dorado County District Attorney is implementing this new policy in his office and urging other district attorneys to follow suit. The office will reject any case where the central evidence rests on a confession obtained through threats, deception, or psychological manipulation. These measures aim to prevent future convictions based on coerced admissions, addressing the miscarriage of justice tied to the 1985 homicide of Jane Hilton. Ricky Davis Pearson publicly apologized to all involved in the miscarriage caused by investigators' tactics. After 37 years, the right person is finally facing accountability, yet many lives were broken by mistakes and baseless accusations. For Jane Hilton's family, there is hope to heal after being divided by questions about their sister's innocence. Ricky Davis cannot regain the liberty he lost, and Michael Green harmed not only the victim's relatives and friends, but also others touched by his conduct in the years surrounding the case.